pleasure to be here finally in the UK. It's my first trip, and it's great to be here at Vegfest. What an amazing event that these folks are putting on. So today I'm going to talk about how to fuel on the run, and how many runners do we have? Now, you can run a mile a day, and that's considered a runner in my book. You don't have to be an ultramarathoner. So we've got a lot of runners in the crowd. What I'm going to be talking about today could be applicable to any endurance sport where you have to fuel, hydrate while you are moving your body. So even if you're not a runner or you're not an endurance athlete, professional athlete, elite athlete, it's important to pay attention to how you fuel. And those of you who aren't familiar with some of the things that I do, I've been running ultramarathons for almost 20 years now. I've run the Western States 100, and I've run that race and won it 7 times in a row. It's a race that takes place in Squaw Valley, California, over the Sierra Nevada mountain ranges, down into the American River canyons. Temperatures can reach over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and this is the best part of that race. You literally look forward to 80 miles. I'm going to move around this way so that folks can see. Can everybody see that's over here? Probably. And mile 80, you get to go through the American River, and even though that water is as cold as can be, basically from snow melt in the mountains, this is what you look forward to. This is the first time I saw daylight. Most people finish this race in the dark, or they see daylight the next day. I ran and set a new course record back in 2004 and ran 15 hours, 36 minutes. So to give you an idea, that's 9-minute, 22-second pace for 100 miles. And that's 18,000 feet of climbing, 23,000 feet of descent. So not a flat London Hyde Park run by any stretch. Most people, to give you an idea, as I mentioned, will be out there for 24 or more hours. In fact, the limit is 30 hours. So in my book, people are out there twice as long as me, and they deserve just as much credit. In 2010, I ran the 24-hour World Championships. Now, running around a circle that's 1 mile in length did never seem to be something I was interested in, but the mental components of running these races, you literally, I think there's probably not a harder thing that I've done in my life. Basically doing the same route for 24 hours, seeing how many miles that you can rack up. And that's the whole premise behind a 24-hour race. I set a new American record at that time, which has been since broken, of 165.7 miles. So for those of you who are familiar with 8-minute 40 pace, that's essentially doing that 6.5 marathons back to back to back to back. That's including bathroom breaks too. Running that over the course of 24 hours in 1 day. Another race. Who's read Born to Run, by the way, in this audience? Okay, many of you. Chris McDougall talks about the Badwater Ultramarathon. It's a race I told myself once, like a 24-hour race, I would never do it. It's 135 miles through Death Valley. Scorching hot temperatures with highs reaching 125 degrees Fahrenheit. The pavement is literally hot enough to fry an egg. And I know it looks strange. You're probably wondering, why would somebody want to be wearing all these clothes this race? But you actually are trying to shield yourself from the hot elements from the sun, as well as the heat that bounces off the pavement. So you're actually trying to cool yourself constantly. These, by the way, are not, those are not puddles on the road. It's a mirage that you see shimmering off. In fact, you can see it shimmering off in the distance. It's like running on the moon. Death Valley is an amazing place. The mountains around there are gorgeous. Fortunately, in Badwater 135, you're running 135 miles of pavement from the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere to the highest point in the lower 48. So the whole idea was to go from the lowest to the highest point when it was originally designed. This is crossing over the salt flats at about mile 15 into the race. This is a common sign you see throughout the event. It's very daunting because you realize that you haven't gone very far. You're still just at sea level after climbing out of 200 feet below sea level. But you're constantly bobbing up and down. Through is very essential. And so when I talk about hydration here in a bit, staying hydrated obviously keeps the body cool. In a race like this, you also have to keep your body cool by wearing ice in a bandana. You'll see in my hat, I've got this big, crazy lump. I didn't develop a cone head while running the race. It's actually ice in the hat. So you're trying to constantly cool your body. You have pacers that run alongside you and essentially make sweat, because the sweat that your body produces evaporates so quickly you don't even notice that you're sweating. So you'll have somebody follow you along. In fact, some people use industrial sprayers and carry those along and spray their runners with them. This is a method I use to stay cool. In fact, now, evidently, you can find a cooler in Las Vegas before the race at all the local hardware stores this size, because everybody's using this technique now. But it was my idea. My buddy had this big cooler of beer, and I said, hey, I might want that later. He's like, where am I going to put my beer later in the race? Meanwhile, I'm putting my dirty butt into that cooler and sinking and submerging my core into it to keep my body cool. And this is the best 2 minutes that you can spend in Death Valley, especially when it's 125 degrees out. So not only are you crossing Death Valley and 120 plus degree temperatures, the next day when you start to make your approach to, my lasers are coming up due to the light here, but you can see that's the road that you go up. It's the most daunting finish I've ever encountered in an ultramarathon. I've already gone 123 miles, and the last 13 miles are basically an uphill climb. So when you see that, you're thinking, gosh, that's the last 13 miles. It's very demoralizing. But the reason these races are designed in this way is to really not only test the physical body, but the mental component, the psychological component. Some of you who've read Born to Run and Eat and Run probably have heard of Dusty. This is what he looks like. He is that wild and crazy. He's paced me in a lot of my events and been a huge inspiration to me to get running. Going from somebody who used to hate running and hate vegetables, now I run ultramarathons and now I'm vegan. So go figure. There's hope for you, trust me. Finally, a race that's been a big part of, in terms of, like, people ask me all the time, what is my most favorite race? What do I think is most beautiful? It has to rank up there as the Hardrock 100 miler. It's a race that takes place in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, 100 miles with 33,000 feet of climbing. So if you can imagine climbing to Mount Everest, that's essentially what you're doing over the course of 100 miles. The air is so thin, you cross 6 passes over 13,000 feet, you literally feel like you're breathing through a cocktail straw the whole time. And in 2007, when I was down there a month before the race, 3 days before the race, I decided to play soccer with a bunch of, or football with a bunch of 6 and 7-year-olds, part of the YMCA DARE program, and I badly sprained my ankle. So Hardrock 100, if it wasn't hard enough already, I did that on a sprained ankle with an air cast on the whole time. And these are some of the views that you get out. This is going up Handy's Peak, which is a 14,000 foot peak that you climb at 42 miles into the race. A lot of times there'd be plenty of snow. In fact, they have fixed ropes. You're literally glissading down the snow, clawing your way up any way you can. And again, gives you an idea. Of course, that's what your face looks like at 14,000 feet, 40 miles into the race. Everybody thinks it's real easy for us top guys and gals. We hurt just as much as you, even if you've never run an ultramarathon. It's not easy for us, trust me. 9-mile descents where you're dropping down into these canyons and valleys. This is Grand Swamp Pass at mile 90 into the race. You have to claw yourself up this scree field. Every step you take forward, you take half a step back because the scree is spinning. And people use trekking poles to get up it. But you've literally come from way down in that canyon and that valley down below, 9 miles. So the climbs, I was just up in the Lake District yesterday. The mountains look very similar at the top, but unfortunately you don't get 9-mile climbs like this. So imagine doing a lot of the climbs in the lakes 3 times that length. And here's what the ankle look like? And it's a good segue into what I'm going to be talking about, because a lot of athletes don't think about nutrition because, of course, we don't notice until we get injured or until we have problems with our diet and our health that we start paying attention to it. So I did not use any ibuprofen when I ran that Hardrock 100. Zero ibuprofen or pharmaceutical drugs beforehand. The things that I did were all natural. So everything from ginger to arnica montana, turmeric. I was basically blending up turmeric and soy milk. Trust me, it's way better than it sounds. I was learning this from an Indian professor that I was studying up in the mountains that I was cooking with. Essential fatty acids, vitamin C. These are all foods and readily available in pharmacies as well as natural food stores or a grocery store that are very powerful anti-inflammatories. Unfortunately, they don't kick in within hours or an hour like ibuprofen, but the effects are much greater in the long term. And that's been my whole goal with running and how I really paid attention to nutrition in my career, is that I wasn't looking for the quick fix. I was in it for the long run and the long haul. So those of you who are just starting to think about your diet and sports nutrition and how you feel your body, don't think about the quick fixes. Think about long-term. Long-term health, to me, is way more important than winning races, and that's why I changed my diet. So I think this quote kind of sums it up, is let food be thy medicine. It's by Hippocrates. Not the other way around, medicine be thy food, which of course these days everybody pops a pill for anything they can take. Maybe not here in the UK, but in the US. Pharmaceutical drugs, in fact, we have it up constantly bombarding our television and commercials. People ask for the drugs before their physicians even prescribe them. So I think we need to start looking to food being our medicine. Who's heard of Kyle Skaggs, the Skaggs brothers, and Born to Run? Maybe some of you. I get questions all the time. What's Kyle up to after he set the record in the Hardrock 100? He no longer runs ultramarathons. He's actually an organic farmer. So when you retire from ultra running, maybe there's a career in farming for you. And that's what Kyle is doing right now. So I'd love to point that out. One last race before I get into some formulas and things that you guys can put into practice with your own training and nutrition is the Spartathlon. It's a race that takes place from Athens, Greece, to Sparta, and it commemorates the route that Philippides ran. Basically trying to get a message from Athens to Sparta to get the Spartans to help out the Athenians who are being bombarded by the Persians. So it has a lot of history and tradition, even though the Greek people aren't known to be great runners. The Olympic spirit in this race is amazing. People just come out in droves in the little villages. You have children following you. You run through ancient sites, as it was ancient Corinth, ancient Nemea. Even though it's 152 miles of pavement, it definitely ranks up there, for me anyways, as one of the most memorable experiences of my life. A lot of people ask in ultramarathons, well, how close are these races? And you can literally be neck and neck. This is me and Belnier Nunes racing at about 90 miles into the Spartathlon. So you look at the results and everybody's spread out at the end, but during the race, you can be neck and neck and you're going head to head. Here's a shot of some children trailing me. They ride their bikes, hollering at you, motivating you on. It's really a magical experience. And of course, the whole town of Sparta comes out and celebrates. They put the olive wreath on you, make you drink river water from the Herodotus River. So there's just a lot of tradition and history with this event. Okay, the big question is hydration. Hydration is really big. Some of you may be familiar, there's a lot of debate right now with nutrition and hydration. And anybody familiar with Dr. Tim Noakes? He's a South African physician, one of my heroes because he's an out-of-the-box thinker. He's really thinking that we're over-hydrating, and his whole thing is that people should be drinking fluids based on taste or based on thirst. And I do agree with him on that point. Today I'm going to talk about some formulas that he might actually kind of disagree with. He might say, don't even worry about the formulas. But a lot of you who are new runners, new exercisers, starting new exercise programs, it's really hard to know because a lot of us just don't pay attention to our body or don't know how our thirst mechanism works. So what I'd like to do today is give you a couple ideas of how you can find out better until your thirst calibrator and your monitor in your own body monitors things. So I just wanted to point that out because a lot of people are like, Scott, why are you telling us how much to drink? I think it's good to have a range. So one thing I've learned is experiment. So the biggest thing you can do, because fluid and hydration intake is really dependent upon a lot of factors. Humidity, temperature, altitude. I live in Colorado now where the average elevation typically is 5,000 to 12,000 feet. And that's much different than if you're down here in London at sea level and soaking in a lot of humidity. So whatever you do, make sure you're taking into account those factors. The biggest one, though, is your own body weight. So please don't drink as much as your training partner. If you're 120 pounds and your training partner is 180 pounds, don't drink the same amount. And this is probably what Dr. Tim Noakes would say too, is a lot of people think they should just drink and drink and drink, and that's why you see marathoners keeling over or having problems with hyponatremia, too much fluids. So the best thing you can do to figure this out is experimentation and do a sweat test. So you can Google sweat test and get the exact protocol, but basically it's taking your body weight, naked body weight, before you run and then after you run. Now, when you finish the run, make sure you towel off because a lot of sweat can still be on your body. If you have real long hair, make sure you wring your hair out as much as possible because what you're trying to do is you take your naked body weight before the run, then take your naked body weight after to try to figure out how much fluid loss you have during the run. Now, if you urinate or go number 2 while you're out on a run, ideally you should measure that as well. I know it sounds a little weird, but that's why you may not go out for a 3-hour run and do this test. You might go out for an hour, hour and a half. Hopefully you're not vomiting and losing fluids that way, but basically you want to account for only the fluids you've lost through sweat. So you have the difference and you have the weight. Who knows their conversion of basically pounds to pints of fluid? Or do you're all probably on the metric system. This is what's interesting. You guys invented this system. We still use it in the U.S. And basically a pint is a pound. So you can easily calculate that out. You can also use the metric system. Yes? Yeah, that's right. Your pints are different size than yours. You measure them by beer and basically the pub pints, right? I'm joking. Yeah, you guys use 20. So basically, use your conversion to figure out pounds or body weight, if you're using kilograms, to how much fluid that would be, okay? Then you can calculate that, and that will tell you how much water you should take in to balance out the body. But if you notice here, I put 1 to 2%, and that's a minus 1 to 2% body rule. And your body weight, this is why, if you notice, you can go out for a run and not drink a sip. Some of you have maybe run marathons, drinking very little. The reason for that is, if it isn't too hot and you drink some on the run, you might be 1 to 2% dehydrated, and you're probably going to be fine. Once you start getting into 3%, the heart rate goes up because you don't have enough blood volume. So I use the 1 to 2% of your body weight. You can be 1 to 2% body weight down. So for some of you, you could be 1 to 2, 3 pounds, 4 pounds down, depending on your body weight. That's why it's very important to use your own body weight. And you'll be perfectly fine. And this is why you'll see the East African runners, the top Caucasian runners, sometimes they don't drink at all during a marathon. And it's very important that you take that into consideration. So that, I think, goes with Dr. Tim Noakes. The body can actually function in a little bit of dehydration. You just can't go beyond 3%. Anybody been 5% dehydrated? 4 or 5%? Okay, if you have been, you start feeling super nauseated. In fact, some races in the U.S. ultras, they'll pull you at that 5% or make you sit down and drink to make sure you get fluid. So if you've ever had feelings of heat stroke, heat illness, and that nausea, you start becoming lightheaded, that's pretty serious. So that's why you want to stay away from the danger zone, which starts getting into that 3 to 5%. And be very careful. At 7%, you'd be rushing There's a lot of debate, like I said. The best way is start experimenting, start figuring out your own factors and your own, basically, environment that you're working out in. Is that making sense to people? Get out there and play with it, okay? Don't just read a book, take some numbers down. You gotta start playing with this. Okay. Sodium. Anybody supplement sodium in their marathons? Probably half marathons, shorter, or other endurance, maybe your half Ironman events, cycling events. I supplement with sodium because I'm out there for 16, 24 hours. Electrolytes become more important. So those of you who've had cramping issues, you may want to try supplementing a little sodium. And this is if you're not getting enough sodium in your exercise, recovery drinks, or if you're not getting enough in your foods typically. So I use capsules, and they're typically 200 to 400 milligrams of sodium. And for my body weight, I'm 165, 170 pounds. I'm doing in the neighborhood of 300 to 400 milligrams of sodium per hour. So start playing with this. If you're having issues where you notice you're cramping, notice that you're really salty after your runs or your workouts, you might try supplementing with sodium. There are some people say, if you're eating enough salt in your daily diet, you may not need to worry about this. But a lot of people cut their salt intake way down due to health reasons, and you might want to bump it up a little bit when you're exercising. Okay, let's talk about nutrition. And I've got a question for all of you. How many of you, let's do this, let's see if anybody in the audience, who can tell me what your body burns for fuel? Fat, protein, carbohydrate while you're endurance exercising. So when you're using endurance, what fuel are you using of those three? I heard of fat. Any carbohydrates taking? Carbs? Any protein, folks? Come on, we gotta have some paleo folks in the audience, right? Okay, the answer to that is ideally mostly fat, okay? This person who said carbohydrate wasn't too far off because there are times where you're burning. But as far as the fuel that you have stored in your muscles, stored in your bloodstream, and when you're typically doing endurance exercise, it should be fat. A smaller percentage might be coming from carbohydrate to keep your brain working, to make sure that you're not bonking. But in general, it should be fat. Those of you who said protein, ideally you shouldn't be burning protein. If you're burning protein, what that means is you might actually be going into ketosis. And in ultramarathons, you might see that, or extended events like an Ironman triathlon. When you're burning protein, you're basically cannibalizing your muscle tissue. You want to stay away from that, okay? It's not a good or efficient fuel. Your most efficient fuel is going to be fat and carbohydrate. So this is a mistake I made. Those of you who read Eat Run, I thought, well, okay, when I was first learning how to run and I was experimenting, I thought, well, if I need fat while I'm endurance exercising, why don't I take a flask of olive oil out on my runs? And it's a great, fat. I read about it all the time. Olive oil is great. The health benefits are huge. I started carrying a little flask of olive oil and started taking that. Bad idea. Basically was vomiting. My stomach became super upset. The reason is you don't need to take in fat while you're aerobically exercising. You have plenty of it on your body. You have plenty in your muscle tissue. So the main source of fuel you actually need to eat and enter through your mouth is carbohydrate. I know there's some of you who may have taken in protein. There was a lot of debate about it several years ago that you should take in protein. Protein will become important in the next few slides when we talk about recovery. But during exercise, your fat and protein intake should only be eaten if you feel like you want to break up the carbohydrate, monotony. And so when I'm doing ultras, I'll eat a little fat and protein, but I'm not actually going to be able to benefit. So that's why when I got that upset stomach when I took the olive oil, is unless it's coconut oil, which has medium chain triglycerides, I won't get too complicated here for those of you who have read a little bit about MCTs, those you can actually metabolize and burn on the spot. But for the most part, it's a more advanced thing. I recommend that people stay away from high-fat foods while exercising, stay away from the high-protein fuel while you're exercising, focus on carbs, okay? Carbs, who's taking a shot of Coca-Cola or Cola, Mountain Dew, whatever you like to do during an event or a training run? What happens when you're bonking and you hit that Coca-Cola? Start feeling better, right? Okay? Because your body, most specifically your nervous system, needs carbohydrate to function. And that's why you get delirious when you bonk. You start seeing stars. So most importantly, it's important for firing of the brain and making sure you stay alert, but also for your muscles, because the nerves are firing the muscles. So there's some interesting research where they've had people just swish carbohydrate solution or electrolyte drinks in their mouths and not even digest it, because they just get enough through their taste buds and it fires the nerves and actually has the same effect as drinking it. So I think we're kind of still learning what carbohydrate is actually doing, but in general, you should be taking it in so that your brain and your nervous system functions so you can fire the muscles better. Of course, how much should you be eating is a big question. And you can write down this formula. It's applicable for any aerobic exercise longer than 90 minutes. So no matter what you do, cycling, swimming, running, mountaineering, skiing, you name it, there's a high and a low. So at the top of the screen here is the low number, and at the next level down in red is the high number. And when you do this formula, for instance, I've got an example up here, somebody who's 130 pounds and somebody who's 180 pounds. You'll notice that it's 41 for the smaller weight individual and 57 for the larger. Why do you suppose the larger individual should take in more carbohydrate? Bigger brains? Partly right, if you agree with that, but basically more muscle tissue. The larger individual is going to need to eat more to get those muscles firing. So this is why don't eat or drink as much as your training partner unless they're the same body weight, okay? It's really dependent upon body weight, and that's why body weight is calculated in this formula. So how do we know how many grams? And the reason I work off of grams than calories is because it's much more specific to carbohydrate. You look at your typical label, and I'm sorry if it's not a UK label, I should have pulled that up, it probably is a little different, but in general it'll say the total carbohydrate grams. Don't worry whether it's sugars or whether it comes from other forms, but you want to look for the total carbohydrate. That's how you figure out how many grams are in your foods, okay? Who likes to use bananas, potatoes, sweet potatoes on the run, okay? I'm a big fan of it too. I use the gels, the blocks, the Cliff Bars, but you also can use real foods. Just Google or find on a nutrition program how many grams of carbohydrate are in those foods, and you can do the same thing. I use an example here. One banana has about 25 grams of carbohydrate. One gel, a typical gel, in the UK you might get some of those other gels that are a little different size too, but in the US it's typically about 25 grams. So for a lot of you, it means more than just one gel every hour and a half, okay? A lot of people are typically under carbohydrate consuming while they're out exercising, and it makes a huge difference. When I started changing this format, I used to go on my runs, and after 20 miles, I'd come back, just on the verge of bonking, and it makes a huge difference in events. You want to be starting this. So, is that making sense to folks, the formula? Okay. I know you had to pull out your calculator or your phones a little bit, but it's really somewhat mathematical and scientific. It's not hard science, it's not complicated, but you do have to plug in a few numbers. So for my long runs and races, the key thing is practice. Don't go and do something. Some of you have a race tomorrow. I know some of you are running half marathons, running the ultra. Don't go out and do something for the first time in racing. Try it in training, so practice it. The other thing too is when you're consuming 50 grams, 40 grams, 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, don't eat that on the top of the hour. I think some people assume, oh, Scott said to eat 50 grams per hour, I'll just eat 2 gels in one shot. What you want to do is, I use the analogy of an IV drip. You want to have that carbohydrate coming in steadily. So every 20 to 30 minutes is key. Think of it coming in steadily versus don't wait until you're bonking 2 hours into your run or your event and then think you're going to make up for it. It's very hard to do that. I mentioned earlier, some of you use regular solid food, bananas, potatoes, whatever. Sports foods versus solid food don't really matter that much except when it comes to digestion. The sport foods are designed to be digested easier. It's also hard. I love to do bean and rice burritos, but at mile 70 and 100 miler, If you've ever tried to eat a green burrito, it's pretty tough to do. So what I like to do is eat my solid food mixed in with sports foods early into the race, and then switch over to the basically sport food entirely available. And then I'll get into just a real quick, this is more advanced, but if you've ever had a sports drink that's been mixed stronger by accident, ever hit an aid station where you're like, wow, the sports drink is super concentrated, ideally that solution should be 7 to 8%. That's what empties the stomach. So if you've ever had that sloshy gut type feeling where the fluid isn't moving, chances are you might have eaten too much and not drinking enough water, or the solution of your carbohydrate drink, electrolyte drink, was too strong. So the way to calculate that is you take the carbs in grams, divide it by the milliliters of water. That'll give you your percentage. If it's 9–10%, you might try backing down. Either drink more water or mix your carbohydrate drink a little less strong. Lastly, I'll just make a comment on this. Who here is familiar with glycemic index? Okay, you have played with it in your, you ever try like high glycemic? This is like Coca-Cola, works so well when you're bonking because it's really high glycemic. Foods such as, maltodextrin, which are in a lot of your gels and drinks, they're very low glycemic. That's why they kind of evenly give you a little bit of a boost. So you're not going to notice that really quick spike. So basically with glycemic index, you might try playing with that at different stages of, say, training or racing. You might find before an uphill, use high glycemic foods when you want that extra kick. Use the low glycemic on a more consistent basis. So it's a little bit more advanced concept, but I mention it because people do get results with it. And then of course, amount and frequency, I'm going to drill it home again. Every 20 to 30 minutes, try not to do it on the top of the hour. It's really key to keep that frequently coming in. Okay, I have a few more slides talking a little bit about protein and fat, because some of you who do long ultra distance stuff, your Ironmans, your ultramarathons, ultra endurance events, this is where I like to do the protein and the fat just to break up what's going through my stomach, because when you're eating constantly for 24 hours, it's nice to have a little mixture. So I like to mix in a fermented soy protein drink with rice milk to get a little protein, and I do that every 2 to 3 hours versus every 20 to 30 minutes. So you might play around with some protein drinks. Fat typically will be in some foods, so I don't specifically add certain fat to things. Those of you who are into coconut oil or play around with MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, you can do that as well. Just keep it in the low range. No more than 3 to 5 grams in a 2 to 3 hour period. Keep it really low. It's not a lot of fat. Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk lastly here about recovery, and I might have a few minutes left for questions, but this is where not only carbohydrate, but protein is important. Can anybody tell me why would you want to take in carbohydrate and protein post-workout? Why is it so important? Anybody in the back? Have a hand? Yes. Sorry. Muscle repair. Very true. You need protein to repair the muscle. I'm looking for something else. So that's partially right, because you do need it for muscle repair. Repairing the damaged muscle, yes. Glycogen? Did you say glycogen? Okay. It's pretty close. Basically what you want to do is glycogen is stored in your muscles, and ideally when you do a hard workout, anybody who's felt the next day they just kind of feel sluggish, well, if you haven't done enough carbohydrate and protein after your workout, and the timing is really critical, 20 to 30 minutes, you don't have that glycogen. And glycogen is basically stored carbohydrate that you don't need to eat. It's in your muscles. Most of us have about 60 to 90 minutes worth of that. That's why your top marathoners, the guys and gals that are running just over 2 hours, they can literally run a race without eating, because they're they're burning a lot of fat for fuel, but then they also have enough glycogen stored in their muscles. They're beasts when it comes to this. They have 90 minutes or more, and so they can literally just use that glycogen that's stored. Now, most of us mere mortals have to eat because we burn it through that glycogen, and when we burn through it, we got to replace it. So that's why after a workout, Whether you do hard strength workouts, whether you do tempo, lactate threshold workouts, or you run longer than an hour and a half, 2 hours, this is when you should be using this formula. So it's long workouts or really intense workouts, so power and strength. The goal here is, it's not just a quick energy drink, by the way. It's actually, I like to call it like a mini meal or a snack. It's basically a glycogen protein replenisher. So I gave an example here. A 130-pound individual would need to take in about 89 grams of carbohydrate. So that's not just a banana. That's like a banana, an energy bar. I used an example here, some different foods that you can use, and some sports drink. It's always a good idea to get some water and hydrate at the same time. So those of you who are just doing a sports drink after your long or really intense workouts, try to blend in some protein powder, something that's high density protein, like an energy bar that has about 15 grams or more of protein. And then of course, get some fluids with it as well. Is this making sense to folks? It makes a huge difference. You won't believe the next day how you feel if you're replenishing properly. Okay, lastly, I know some of these books may or may not be published in the UK, but I think most of them are. You can check the bookstore upstairs. But everybody asks about sports nutrition books and vegetarian sports nutrition books. If you notice, I didn't talk a lot about plant-based sports nutrition. The reason for that is you never are really eating a steak while you're running or doing aerobic exercise. Do we have any steak eaters that like to chow down on a steak while they're running or cycling or doing a triathlon? Come on, nobody? So this information is applicable whether you're somebody who's a plant-based vegetarian eater or you're somebody who's a carnivore. You don't have to be plant-based, but there's some great plant-based nutrition, sports nutrition books out there. Vegetarian Sports Nutrition, which I wrote the foreword for, highly recommended if you want more detail. Becoming Vegan, another great book that has a sports nutrition section. You're starting to see more plant-based specific sports nutrition books out there, but for many years there just wasn't a lot on the sports nutrition side. Partly because you can use the other books as well. So there are a few specifics out there. And then I did put down a couple that are my favorites that aren't necessarily plant-based sports nutrition, but they're good references. And I'm a big fan of Michael Pollan's work, his Weird Bread, Omnivore's Dilemma, and Defensive Food. It really, those books, like Andrew Weil's book, Spontaneous Healing, really got me interested in eating plant-based. So they're good inspiration. I have 1 or 2 minutes. Can I do? Okay, I have 1 minute. Now you can give me a couple extra minutes since the equipment wasn't working. Okay. So, and those of you too, you can catch me on Facebook. I know I'm not here in the UK very often, but I try to get information and things that I'm reading, getting inspired by, tips. Follow me on Facebook, on Twitter. I also have a blog on my website, so I try to feed information out there, even if you can't get to the States or I don't get to the UK. But I'll definitely be back. I know a lot of you have friends in other cities. So I'm going to take one question, or maybe two. I'm going to do speed question, actually. Can I do speed? You have to ask your question in Twitter length, okay? Those of you who don't know Twitter, it's 160 characters, okay, not words. So in order for me to rip through several questions, I'm going to rip through as many as I can until she pulls me off the stage. You have to ask your question super short, okay? And it's going to be speed. I'm going to answer just a few words or one sentence. Okay, first one. Okay, when I'm not hungry in a race, but I need to eat, what do? Force myself to eat. That's the answer. You have to do it because your body needs it. So find foods that work. Yes? Question, do I do long runs, 3 to 4 hours? It's called glycogen depletion runs. It's becoming a little bit more popular now. I do those not because I try to, but because I never used to eat. Back when I started running 20 years ago, I did that. So glycogen depletion, it's PhD level. Those of you who are new runners, please don't do those runs. Learn how to eat and fuel yourself while you're running or exercising. then you can do glycogen depletion. But those of you who are more advanced, look it up. It's called glycogen depletion. You can actually train your body a little bit to function well. Just don't go beyond 3 hours. I think it's too long for most people to go beyond 3 hours. One or two more, and she's going to pull me off soon. You just let me know. Yes, in the back. Real short. I didn't know I was answering sports injury questions, but plantar fasciitis, by the way, anti-inflammatories that I mentioned earlier, you can definitely use that. But the best advice, night splint, 2 words. Wear it at night. It's very critical. A couple more quick ones. Yes? Sorry. What's my next race? I'm planning to do a 24-hour in the spring, potentially in Europe, actually. I'm just trying to find the right event. I got to take back my record and go after the world record. So then I'm going to retire, and then I get to come over and do races such as the Lakeland 100-miler for fun. That's what I'm looking forward to, retiring and just doing some of these races. One more. All right, you guys know it all. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. I will be talking tomorrow about more what I fuel my body with on a daily basis, how I balance protein, carbohydrate, and being plant-based. Because a lot of you are like, how does this guy do it? He's been a plant-based athlete now going on 14 years and pushing my body limits. So I'll talk more general nutrition tomorrow. But thanks for having me. I will be signing books. I know I had to turn a few of you away. I'm going to be back upstairs, right next door. There's a bookstore booth, so I'll be right there signing books, and also I'm going to meet the experts. I forget which time. I think 3 o'clock. So thanks again, everybody. It's been a real pleasure.